Ghosts of the past, shadows in the hallway. Bishop's Refuge was a place where progress seemed an abstract concept, a timber cabin clinging to the edge of a whispering Maine forest, light years removed from the vibrant chaos he'd once navigated. Sunlight, filtered through the thick canopy, painted shifting patterns on the aged wood floor as he meticulously attended to his clock, an antique whose every tick echoed in the stillness, a percussive reminder of irretrievable time. The jarring trill of the antiquated landline sliced through the quiet that he paused, hand hovering above the receiver. His phone rarely rang. He was a phantom, a rumor circulating through the shadowed corners of a world he'd left behind. He answered. Bishop, a voice like crushed gravel grated, sending a tremor through him despite the years. Remember Santiago? The name functioned like a corroded key unlocking a chamber of grim memories. Santiago, Buenos Aires, the crimson stain on the stones. What of him? His son has cultivated a taste for vengeance that he's been nosing around your current existence. The line went dead, leaving Bishop with a buzzing in his ears and a leaden weight in his gut that he hadn't used that name in decades. How was this possible? His gaze drifted to a faded photograph on the mantel. Sarah, her radiant, untainted smile a sharp contrast to the gathering storm threatening to engulf them both. He had to ascertain the truth. The following dawn found Bishop parked at a remove from Northwood High. The brisk air carried the scent of decaying leaves mingled with youthful anticipation. Students swirled around the entrance, a lively mosaic of backpacks and exuberant chatter. He scanned the throng, his vision trained to discern concealed details. Then he spotted them, two men lounging against a dark sedan across the street, out of sync with the surroundings. Their attire was too severe, their bearing too stiff, their attention too unwavering. Their focus wasn't the school, it was something specific. Sarah. She stood near the doorway, engaged in conversation with friends. Her laughter drifted on the breeze, a sound that seemed to taunt the lurking menace. The men remained stationary. Point 1, a burly figure with a shaved head, raised binoculars. Bishop's stomach tightened. He observed as the man lowered the binoculars slightly, directing them toward Sarah, then murmuring to his companion, who offered a curt nod. A signal. Bishop understood. Confirmation, target identified. Instinct, honed by years of rigorous training and visceral experience, surged to the forefront. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the icy, clinical detachment that had always been his most formidable weapon. He comprehended their capabilities. He understood their intent, and he knew he couldn't permit it. He ignited the engine, the rumble a low growl echoing the predator stirring within. He eased into the street, executing a slow U-turn, repositioning for a clearer view. The men remained oblivious, their focus riveted on Sarah. A black SUV then slid in beside the sedan. A third man emerged, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He spoke briefly to the others, then gestured toward Sarah. That sealed it. Bishop slammed his foot on the accelerator, tires screaming as he hurtled across the street, devoid of a concrete plan, but determined to disrupt their scheme. He had to create a diversion, to buy Sarah valuable time. He braked directly in front of the sedan, obstructing their view of the school. The men stared, their faces registering surprise and irritation. Got a problem, the bulky one growled, exiting the vehicle. Bishop ignored him, his gaze unwavering on the man in the hat. He discerned a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a brief spark of fear swiftly masked by practiced indifference. Move the car, the man in the hat commanded, his voice a low threat. Not today, Bishop replied, his voice a soft murmur carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken intentions. He knew he had exposed himself, crossing the line from observer to actor. It no longer mattered. Sarah was safe, for the moment. The bulky man advanced, fists clenching. Bishop tensed, prepared to respond. The air thrummed with suppressed violence. The school bell then shrilled, shattering the tension. Students streamed from the building, inundating the sidewalk. Sarah emerged, laughing with her friends, blissfully unaware of her brush with danger. The man in the hat cursed under his breath. We'll be back, he vowed, his eyes burning into Bishop's. He turned and climbed back into the SUV. The sedan followed, peeling away from the curb and vanishing into the traffic. Bishop watched them depart, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had stalled them, but knew this was merely the opening act. The ghosts of his past had tracked him down, intent on claiming everything he cherished. He would protect her, regardless of the cost. He needed to resurrect the man he believed he had buried long ago. The substitute, Mr. Smith arrives. The information swam before Bishop's eyes. Sarah Jenkins, age 16, witness to the brutal slaying of her parents 3 years prior, the case, officially closed, pinned on a low-level enforcer named Razor Rossetti, currently serving a life sentence. But the whispers, the unsolved leads, the lingering unease in the files that they screamed unfinished business. The Rossetti family ran deep, and their reach, it seemed, extended even to a quiet suburban high school. He slammed the laptop shut, the fluorescent hum of his safe house apartment suddenly grating. Sarah was a target, a loose end someone wanted tied off. He had to get to her, directly. Subtlety be damned. His phone buzzed. A text from Silas, his go-to guy for the unsavory necessities. * credentials ready. History, BA, minor in, tactical applications, good luck, teach. * Bishop smirked. Silas had a sense of humor, twisted as it was. He spent the next hour transforming. Gone was the tailored suit, replaced by a tweed jacket a decade out of style, complete with elbow patches. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, instantly softening his features. He even slicked back his hair, revealing a disconcerting amount of forehead. Jason Statham, international man of mystery, was dead. In his place stood Mr. Smith. Northwood High was a brick monstrosity, a testament to budgetary constraints and questionable architectural choices. As he parked his battered sedan, another Silas special, Bishop scanned the grounds. Security cameras, predictably, were few and far between, positioned for maximum visibility, but minimal effectiveness. The student body was a mix of bored apathy and teenage angst, a perfect camouflage. He walked into the main office, the bell above the door jangling a dissonant tune. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. A woman with a severe bun and even severer expression looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Her voice was sharp, devoid of warmth. "Yes, I'm Mr. Smith, the substitute for, Mr. Peterson." He offered a tentative smile. The woman, Isabel Diaz, according to her nameplate, arched an eyebrow. "You're Mr. Smith." "That's what they tell me," Bishop replied, carefully maintaining the persona. Diaz tapped a pen against her teeth, her gaze lingering on his attire. Mr. Peterson had a unique teaching style. The students were fond of him. "I'll do my best to fill his shoes," Bishop said, taking the keys and schedule she thrust towards him. He could feel her assessing him, trying to place him. She was sharp, observant. A potential problem. "Room 212, she said, her voice clipped. "Don't let them chew you up and spit you out, Mr. Smith." Room 212 was a zoo. The remnants of teenage rebellion were scattered across the desks, crumpled papers, half-eaten snacks, graffiti etched into the desktops. He spotted Sarah instantly. She was sitting in the back row, her head bowed, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around her. Her dark hair shielded her face, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden silence. All eyes turned to him. "Good morning, class," he said, his voice a little too loud. "I'm Mr. Smith, your substitute for the next few weeks." A few snickers rippled through the room. He ignored them, focusing on Sarah. She hadn't looked up. "Today," he continued, "we'll be discussing the French Revolution, and perhaps," he added, his eyes scanning the room, "the importance of vigilance." He spent the next hour lecturing, his words a carefully crafted blend of historical facts and veiled warnings. He felt Diaz's presence at the doorway, a silent sentinel. She watched him, her expression unreadable, as he wrote a seemingly innocuous equation on the board. 1789 equals liberty or death. Underneath it, he scribbled a single word, protect. He glanced at Sarah. This time, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just confusion, crossed her face. The game had begun, raising eyebrows and red flags. The air in the classroom crackled with a different kind of energy than usual. Mr. Smith, perched precariously on a student's desk, was demonstrating the proper way to disarm a Roman centurion. "Now, the key," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried to the back row, "is to exploit the weaknesses in their lorica segmentata." He punctuated the sentence by yanking an imaginary sword from an imaginary Roman, sending a ripple of nervous giggles through the room. Izzy Diaz watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, a frown etching itself onto her usually smooth forehead. The lesson, if one could call it that, was certainly engaging, but was it history? She had her doubts. Mar Smith had been hired on an emergency basis, a favor from a friend of the superintendent. His file was thin, and his teaching methods were, well, unique. Sarah sat in the front row, her eyes glued to Mr. Smith, a faint smile playing on her lips. Izzy's frown deepened. Mr. Smith seemed particularly attentive to Sarah, almost protective. It wasn't overt, but Izzy's finely tuned radar was picking up signals. He'd made sure she had the best seat, always checked on her during group activities, and seemed to subtly position himself between her and the door. "Okay, team," Mr. Smith said, hopping off the desk with surprising agility. "Pop quiz, what was the Centurion's favorite flavor of gelato?" A chorus of groans filled the room. "Mr. Smith," protested a lanky boy named Kevin. "That wasn't even in the lesson." Mr. Smith winked. "History is more than dates and battles, Kevin. It's about understanding the man. And every man has a weakness, especially for gelato." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "Now, who can tell me about the Centurion's weakness?" Sarah raised her hand. "They were overconfident and relied too much on their armor." "Excellent, Sarah, but more importantly," Mr. Smith added, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "they were suckers for pistachio." The class erupted in laughter. Even Izzy couldn't help but crack a small smile. He had a way with them, that was undeniable, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later that day, Izzy witnessed another peculiar incident. During lunch break, a group of boys were playfully tossing a football around the cafeteria. The ball went astray, hurtling towards Sarah, who was engrossed in a book. Before Izzy could react, Mr. Smith had moved with lightning speed, intercepting the ball with a casual grace that belied his stocky build. He then proceeded to throw the ball back with a power that sent the boys scattering. "Careful, lads," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. "This isn't the NFL." The boys, clearly intimidated, mumbled apologies and retreated. Mr. Smith then turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "You all right, love?" Sarah nodded, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Thanks, Mr. Smith." Izzy watched them from across the cafeteria, a knot forming in her stomach. The protectiveness was becoming more pronounced, more concerning. It was one thing to be a good teacher, but Mr. Smith seemed to be taking on a role that went far beyond the call of duty. As she walked back to her office, she passed by the gym. The sounds of rhythmic thumping and grunts echoed from within. Curiosity piqued. She peeked inside. Mr. Smith was sparring with the gym teacher, Mr. Henderson, a former college linebacker. Mr. Smith moved with a surprising fluidity, dodging Mr. Henderson's powerful blows with ease and countering with swift, precise strikes. It was clear that Mr. Smith was holding back, but his skill was undeniable. Izzy retreated quickly, her mind racing. A history teacher with the reflexes of a ninja and an almost obsessive protectiveness towards a specific student. It was raising eyebrows and red flags. She had a sinking feeling that Mr. Smith wasn't who he claimed to be, and whatever he was doing at Northwood High, it was far more complicated than teaching history. She picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over the numbers to the superintendent's office. This wasn't just about unconventional teaching methods anymore, this was about student safety, and Izzy Diaz didn't take that lightly. "Viper in the nest." Viper fidgeted with the dime store spectacles perched precariously on his nose, their cheap lenses reflecting the harsh glare of the school's overhead lights. He leaned against the wall, pretending to study a bulletin board dense with bake sale flyers and student creations, yet his reptilian gaze methodically swept the corridor. A burly maintenance man known as Spanner, shaved head gleaming, toolbox brimming with covertly modified implements, ambled past, offering a subtle acknowledgement. Another operative, the deceptively slight Silas, wielded a mop and bucket that likely concealed a disassembled long-range rifle, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting instant before she resumed her performance of polishing an already pristine floor. Sarah's vibrant hair drew his attention first, a blaze of color amid the throng. She was laughing, her expression radiant as she conversed with Mr. Smith. Viper's mouth tightened. Smith loomed larger than anticipated, his movements possessing a contained energy suggesting a skill set beyond simple pedagogy. He filed the observation. Smith presented an obstacle. "Maintain surveillance," Viper breathed into his wrist, calm, his voice a sibilant whisper. "Especially on the instructor. He's more perceptive than initial reports indicated." Silas's voice buzzed in his ear. "Already ahead of you, Viper, the guy's got eyes everywhere. I nearly tripped his wire earlier. Viper straightened from the wall, faking an awkward stumble that he needed proximity, a deeper understanding of the terrain that he affected interest in the fire escape plan, his mind a whirlwind of strategic calculation, the library, advantageous sightlines, multiple avenues for egress, the cafeteria, overly exposed, too many potential witnesses, the gymnasium, conditionally viable, requiring further investigation that he drifted towards the teacher's lounge, the cloying aroma of day-old coffee and quiet. Desperation permeating the air, Spanner was already present, tinkering with the antiquated coffee maker, deftly disabling the security cam with a high-frequency pulse emitter disguised as a sugar packet. Discover anything useful? Viper queried, pouring himself a cup of the acrid brew. Spanner grunted a negative. Schematics are outdated, fire exits have been relocated, they remodeled last summer. Viper cursed inwardly. That complicates matters. Silas, your status? Found the main electrical panel, she replied, her voice a low thrum in his ear. Easy access, can plunge them into darkness, ignite some pandemonium. Execute after Sarah is secure, Viper instructed. Minimize extraneous casualties. Meanwhile, in his classroom, a chill crawled across the back of Mr. Smith's neck that he'd been observing the individual by the notice board, the parent, in the uncomfortably tight suit, the unsettling stillness of his gaze that he'd registered the exchange with the maintenance man, the almost imperceptible nod of recognition, then the woman with the mop, her attention lingering for a beat too long that he excused himself from Sarah and the handful of pupils he was mentoring, feigning a need for the restroom that he moved with speed and silence, his senses honed that he located the school's security office, a confined, windowless space, and bypassed the flimsy lock, the monitors sputtered to life, displaying grainy footage of the school's corridors that he advanced the playback, scrutinizing the images, searching for them, there, the man by the notice board that he magnified the image, sharpening the details that it was him. Viper that he hadn't encountered him for years, not since, but that frigid, calculating stare was unmistakable that he observed Silas, the cleaning personnel, manipulating the power outlet adjacent to the gymnasium that he saw Spanner, disappearing into a ventilation shaft in close proximity to the library. They were here, they were aware of Sarah, his heart hammered against his sternum. Action was paramount that he had to safeguard Sarah, that he had to neutralize them, before irreparable damage was done. Subtle interventions. The cafeteria's fluorescent tubes buzzed, their harsh light dissecting the lunchtime flurry. Sarah, perched precariously on her chair, listlessly turned a fork through tepid spaghetti. A few tables over, Mr. Smith pretended to be absorbed in a tattered Moby Dick, though his gaze darted around the room. He'd spotted them, two figures in too big janitorial garb, their faces grim, steering a cumbersome cleaning cart in Sarah's direction. A flash of reflected light snagged his attention, a length of pipe, wobbling atop the cart, too blatant, too obvious, but a devastating accident waiting to happen if it found its mark. That he had to intervene, and swiftly, with practiced casualness, Mr. Smith ambled towards the condiment station, feigning a collision with a student struggling with a tower of milk cartons. The resulting cascade of white liquid created a momentary uproar. Amid the diverted attention, Mr. Smith, with a subtle movement honed from years spent in the shadows, nudged the cart's leg. Lurched, the pipe teetered, then crashed to the linoleum with a clang, earning glares from the bogus custodians. My apologies, Mr. Smith murmured, unnoticed, resuming his seat with a bland smile. The disguised pair exchanged frustrated looks, their chance dissolving in the noontime hubbub. Later that evening, Mr. Smith meticulously purged his apartment, scrubbing away remnants of his former existence. Then, seated at his computer, he unleashed a flurry of keystrokes that he navigated to a dark web forum, a haven for those with flexible ethics and specialized talents. That he composed a message, carefully crafted to read as a desperate plea, seeking info on Sarah Jenkins, allegedly connected to the mythical Volkov assets, last seen in contact with a notorious art dealer, last known to be in Prague, confirm location and affiliations, compensation upon verification. A calculated risk. The Volkov fortune existed only in his imagination, as did Sarah's supposed ties to Prague, yet, it was enough to muddy the waters, sending the hunters on a wild goose chase across continents. That he clicked post and watched as the message vanished into the digital abyss, praying it would buy Sarah precious time. The following day, Sarah lingered after class, gathering her belongings with exaggerated slowness. "Mr. Smith," she ventured, her voice barely audible. He looked up, his expression carefully controlled. "Yes, Sarah. I've noticed you've been around," she stated. A blush crept up her neck as she fidgeted with her backpack strap. "Like, near me. A lot." Mr. Smith leaned back, feigning surprise. "Really? I hadn't realized that. I must confess, I do favor this particular corner. The light is rather flattering, wouldn't you agree?" He chuckled, testing the plausibility of his explanation. Sarah remained unconvinced. "It's more than the light. Yesterday, the cafeteria. I felt like you were watching over me." He suppressed a sigh. She was more perceptive than he had calculated. He needed precision, a careful balance of protection and concealment. "Sarah, I'm an educator. Attentive observation is a part of my vocation. That if you feel unease or insecurity, please bring it to my attention." He paused, watching her reaction. "Or, better still, confide in someone you trust. A counselor, your parents." She shook her head. "That is not it. It's just. I sense you possess knowledge. You're anticipating an unfolding event." Mr. Smith locked eyes with her, his face an enigma. "Sarah, the world presents moments of trepidation. However, it shelters benevolent individuals, filled with empathy. Should a need arise, however small, do not hesitate to request assistance." He offered a brief, reassuring smile. As Sarah departed the classroom, Mr. Smith gazed out the window, his thoughts colliding. He was treading a tightrope, balancing precariously above a chasm. He must safeguard Sarah, shielding her from the encroaching threat, while preserving his anonymity. Each calculated act, each subtle interference, represented a gamble. He could only pray he could keep her secure long enough to prevail. Trust and whispers of the past. The after-school sun cast long shadows across Mr. Smith's classroom as Sarah lingered, backpack slung over one shoulder. The last stragglers had finally cleared out, leaving an unusual stillness in their wake. She fiddled with the strap, avoiding his gaze. "Mr. Smith." He looked up from grading papers, a faint crease appearing between his brows. "Everything all right, Sarah?" She hesitated, then blurted out, "It's about my dad." The words felt heavy, like stones tumbling from a crumbling wall. He wasn't just a businessman. Not really." Mr. Smith leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, patient. He didn't push, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just waited. Sarah took a shaky breath. "He was involved in things, dangerous things. I never knew the details, but there were always whispers, hushed phone calls, men with hard eyes coming and going at all hours." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill. "He kept me away from it, tried to protect me, but it wasn't enough. They got to him anyway." Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken so openly about her father's death in years, not even to her aunt. The fear, the grief, the gnawing uncertainty, it all came flooding back. "And you think these men with hard eyes are still around?" Mr. Smith asked softly, his voice devoid of judgment. Sarah nodded, tears welling up. "I don't know for sure, but the feeling, it's like a shadow, always lurking just out of sight, like I'm being watched." Mr. Smith rose from his chair, his movements fluid and strangely reassuring. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the empty schoolyard. "Sometimes, the past casts a long shadow, Sarah, but shadows can be deceptive. They can make things seem bigger, scarier than they actually are." He turned back to her, his eyes intense but kind. "I can't promise you that the past won't come back to haunt you, but I can promise you that I'll do everything in my power to protect you from it. Trust me, Sarah." His words, simple yet firm, resonated with her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile sense of security. She managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Mr. Smith." The next day's field trip to the local history museum was supposed to be a light-hearted break from the classroom. Instead, it became a battleground. The students were milling around the exhibit on local industry, when a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. A man, tall and wiry with a serpentine tattoo coiling around his neck, Viper, was arguing loudly with a security guard. His voice, laced with menace, carried across the hall. Sarah felt a jolt of icy fear. She recognized him. He had been one of the men who visited her father, her heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Smith, who had been guiding a small group of students through the exhibit, immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. He scanned the room, his gaze locking on Viper. He subtly steered Sarah behind a large display case, shielding her from view. Viper shoved the security guard aside and began moving through the crowd, his eyes darting around, searching. Panic flared in Sarah's chest that he was looking for her. As Viper rounded a corner, he spotted Sarah. A cruel smile twisted his lips. He lunged forward, knocking over a display of antique tools. Mr. Smith reacted instantly. He stepped in front of Sarah, blocking Viper's path. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Viper sneered. "Get out of my way, teacher, this doesn't concern you." Mr. Smith didn't move. Viper lunged again, a glint of metal flashing in his hand, a switchblade. In a blur of motion, Mr. Smith disarmed him, twisting Viper's wrist with a practiced ease that belied his mild-mannered persona. The knife clattered to the floor. Before Viper could recover, Mr. Smith delivered a swift, disabling kick to his leg, sending him sprawling. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. The other students, momentarily stunned, began to scream. Mr. Smith, his face impassive, grabbed Viper's arm and hauled him to his feet. "I think it's time we had a little chat," he said, his voice low and dangerous under scrutiny. The warmth leaching from Izzy's chipped mug barely dented the deep-seated chill that had taken root within her. The file on her desk, a stark white accusation, underscored the mahogany surface. Mr. Smith. Or whatever name he'd chosen, the background check had returned. Tainted, inconsistencies riddled the data, gaps yawned in his history. A phantom employer. A bogus degree. She activated the intercom. "Mr. Smith, could you spare a moment in my office?" Her tone was carefully even, masking the anxiety that clawed at her insides, anxiety for Sarah, for her students, and for the institution's reputation. He appeared swiftly, the customary affability gone, replaced by a guarded demeanor. "Is there a problem, Principal Diaz? Please, sit down." She indicated the chair. "I've been reviewing your credentials, and a few questions have arisen." He lowered himself into the seat, posture rigid, gaze fixed on the incriminating folder. "Of course." Izzy formed a steeple with her fingers. "Your application cites employment with Apex Educational Solutions from 2015 to 2018. Yet, our records show no such entity ever existed." A tick pulsed in his cheek. "They were a small outfit, a private tutoring service. Short-lived." "I understand, and Western Pacific University?" A flicker of hesitation. "That was an online course. One which, according to its website, terminated its degree programs in 2010. Izzy leaned forward, her eyes holding his. "Mr. Smith, who are you really?" Before he could formulate a response, a fracas erupted outside the door. A chorus of yelps, a resounding crash, followed by an unnerving silence. "What in the world?" Izzy surged to her feet, adrenaline surging. Smith was already at the portal, his hand clamped on the handle. He yanked it open to reveal a tableau of subdued pandemonium. Students clustered nervously by the water cooler, their whispers creating a low hum, and standing in their midst, his face a study in disbelief, was a specter from Bishop's past, Marco, his former cohort, the architect of his downfall. Marco's gaze snared Bishop's, recognition sparked, swiftly followed by a slow, venomous smile. Well, Marco purred, his voice cutting through the air. "Bishop, imagine finding you here, molding young minds." The color vanished from Bishop's complexion. Marco knew that he knew what Bishop was, that understanding was a loaded weapon, aimed directly at Sarah. He shoved past Izzy, his voice a low growl. "Marco, we need to talk, now." He seized Marco's arm, attempting to steer him toward the nearest exit. "Not so quick, Bishop," Marco chuckled, resisting the pull. "I think I'll linger a while, perhaps enlighten the principal about your checkered history." He flicked a glance at Izzy, a malicious spark glinting in his gaze. "Wouldn't you concur, Principal Diaz? I'm certain you'd be fascinated to discover the caliber of educator you've employed." Bishop's mind raced, a frantic engine that he had to extract Marco from the building, distance him from Sarah, but how? Time was dissolving. He could feel Izzy's scrutiny, her dawning suspicion. He glimpsed Sarah peering from behind a knot of students, her brow furrowed with worry. He faced a cruel dilemma: protect Sarah, or safeguard his secret, with chilling certainty. He recognized that the two were mutually exclusive, dance of deception, symphony of violence. The gymnasium glittered with a flimsy, manufactured cheer, strings of fairy lights throbbed, bathing self-conscious teenagers in a treacly pop glow as they shuffled to the music. Sarah, almost beatific in a simple azure dress, actually smiled while dancing with a boy whose name eluded Mr. Smith. He remained a silent observer in a rented tuxedo, back pressed against the cool wall, vigilance etched on his face. The atmosphere was cloying, a blend of cheap perfume and anxious perspiration, a deceptive calm thick enough to taste. Then the music abruptly ceased, not a gentle diminuendo, but a savage cut-off that tore through the room like a shattered silence. Light stuttered, plunged into a breathless darkness, then glared back to life, revealing figures pouring from emergency exits, stark silhouettes against the intrusive light, not chaperones, masked men in black, their weapons catching the light with predatory gleams. Bedlam erupted. A scream pierced the air, quickly followed by a chorus of terrified cries. Mr. Smith reacted, a contained burst of kinetic energy that he thrust Sarah behind the overturned punch bowl, a meager bulwark against the onslaught. Stay down, don't move. His voice, a gravelly rumble, barely cut through the pandemonium. He intercepted the first assailant, a goon brandishing a baseball bat laced with razor wire. The makeshift weapon whistled past his ear, a near miss. Mr. Smith bypassed any elaborate maneuvers. A focused kick slammed into the attacker's knee, the sharp crack of bones sickeningly distinct. The man collapsed, a useless, twitching mass on the polished floor. He wrested the bat, now slick with crimson, and pivoted to face the next wave. The gymnasium devolved into a ghastly tableau of savagery. Gunfire exploded, scattering students like flushed quail. Mr. Smith flowed with frightening purpose, a vortex of controlled ferocity. He wielded the bat with grim efficacy, disabling, never executing, buying precious time for the students' flight. He caught the terror in their wide eyes, stark, untainted fear mirroring a shard of his own buried dread. They needed to escape, every single one of them. Then his gaze locked on Viper. He stood at the gymnasium's farthest end, a shadowy maestro conducting his macabre symphony. A wicked smile played on his lips as he savored the unfolding chaos. He lifted a hand, and the barrage ceased. The remaining assailants formed a cordon, entrapping those who hadn't managed to flee. Mr. Smith, Viper's voice resonated, amplified and distorted by a megaphone. Or perhaps something more, resonant. I know your true identity. I know your true nature. A pause, letting the words fester in the air. Come and find me. Mr. Smith didn't hesitate. He let the bat drop, its clatter echoing in the stark stillness, and began to advance. Each step was measured, resolute, exuding an aura of lethal resolve. He passed huddled knots of terrified students, their expressions illuminated by the flickering lights, past the sprawled forms of the wounded, the spilled blood staining the dance floor. He reached Viper, the distance evaporating with each stride. Viper remained unperturbed. He produced a knife, a gleaming shard that reflected the harsh overheads. Let's observe how your theatrics fare against honed steel. The confrontation was brutal, a savage ballet of feints and near fatalities. Viper was swift, lithe, but Mr. Smith was implacable. He parried the knife strikes with his bare hands, the blade biting into his flesh, drawing ruby streaks. He absorbed the pain, channeling it into his movements, his counterattacks growing sharper, more forceful. He disarmed Viper with a decisive, savage motion, sending the knife spinning across the floor. He seized Viper by the throat, his grip tightening, choking off his breath. Viper's eyes bulged with terror, his face darkening to a bruised plum. This concludes here, Mr. Smith grated, his voice a hoarse, primal utterance. You will no longer inflict harm on anyone. He stood poised to deliver the coup de grace, to extinguish Viper's reign of terror. When his eyes fell on Sarah, she stood behind Viper, her eyes wide, imploring him not to. Don't, please, don't. He faltered, the pressure on Viper's windpipe slackened. He couldn't extinguish him in front of her. He couldn't bear her witnessing the manifestation of the monster he fought so vehemently to suppress. Viper seized his opportunity, shoving Mr. Smith away and scrambling backward onto his feet. He spat on the floor, a vile slurry of blood and spittle. This encounter isn't concluded, he hissed. Not even remotely. He dissolved into the chaos, vanishing into the gloom, leaving behind a panorama of ruin and extinguished innocence. Mr. Smith remained motionless, panting, blood dripping down his hands, the weight of his failing bearing down on him. tangible and crushing that he had rescued the students, but at what ultimate price, and when Viper inevitably retaliated, what then? Shadows fade, truth emerges. The air thrummed with residual energy, the astringent tang of ozone mingling with the metallic reek of blood, a grim tableau of the fight. Smith slumped against the desk, now lying on its side, a spreading stain painting his shirt a darker shade. Viper was a broken heap amidst his defeated crew. Smith had moved with lethal grace, each parry and thrust a brutal ballet, but age had begun to exact its toll. A javelin of pain skewered his ribs with every shallow breath. Should have stayed in the rocking chair, Grandpa, Viper gargled, his voice thick with blood. Smith ignored him, his gaze drawn to the pulsing sirens painting the night sky. Time had run out, Sarah was safe, the immediate threat quelled, but the long arm of the law was reaching. Secrets he'd desperately tried to keep buried now threatened to claw their way to the surface. He flicked a glance towards the doorway, a silent communication to Sarah, who stood transfixed, her eyes reflecting a jarring mix of fear and nascent comprehension. He recognized that look, the shattering of innocence, the loss of naive trust. Moments later, cold steel clamped around his wrists. As they escorted him away, he met Sarah's gaze one last time. He prayed she understood, prayed she would be okay. Days dissolved into weeks. Smith occupied a stark holding cell, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the resonant clang of steel doors. His lawyer, a perpetually anxious man named Miller, twisted his hands like rags. "The evidence is compelling, Mr. Smith," Miller stammered. "Multiple assault charges, resisting arrest, and, of course, your history." Smith remained stoic. "Sarah? She's secure, protective custody." Miller hesitated. "She's also cooperating with the authorities." Smith's hopes plummeted. He knew what that meant. Meanwhile, under Detective Reynolds' watchful, Sarah was doing what she had to. She surrendered the encrypted files Bishop had entrusted to her, revealing the syndicate's intricate network of graft and corruption. She recounted the recent events, her voice trembling, yet resolute. It felt like betrayal, but necessity dictated. The evidence proved damning. Within days, the syndicate's foundation began to crack, arrests mounted, assets were frozen. The specter that had haunted Smith for so long was finally collapsing. One evening, Reynolds found Sarah in her temporary haven, gazing out at the glittering sprawl of the city. "He asked about you," Reynolds said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Smith thought he needed to know you were safe." Sarah nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "He saved me." Reynolds sighed. "He did that. He also trampled over a few laws in the process." He'll face the music. Sarah turned, her face etched with anguish. "He shouldn't have to. He did what no one else dared." Reynolds shook his head. "The system doesn't bend that easily, Sarah, but, maybe, just maybe, we can ensure he gets a fair shake." The following morning, a small package awaited Sarah on her doorstep. Inside, a burner phone and a scribbled message: "Forge your own destiny, you have the strength." Smith had vanished. He'd leveraged old contacts, connections he'd sought to bury, to disappear into thin air. No forwarding address, no lingering trace that he was once again a wraith, swallowed by the shadows. Sarah activated the phone, encrypted messages led her to a discreet storage facility. Inside, she found a new identity, a passport, a generous sum of money that he'd gifted her, a clean slate, a chance to rebuild her life anew. Bishop, faithful to his promise, also melted away. No farewell, no explanation. He simply faded into the ether, seeking refuge in anonymity. Perhaps, in some forgotten corner of the world, he might discover a sliver of peace, far from the violence and perfidy that had defined his existence. Sarah stood in the storage unit, the weight of her new reality a palpable burden. Alone, yet not defeated, she possessed the skills Smith had imparted, the knowledge she had gained, and a newfound resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The shadows might forever linger, but she was prepared to confront them. She was ready to become the hero she needed.